Okay, good morning. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on the NPD closure project, revised environmental impact statement. Um, these are our bi-monthly webinars, and this is our first of 3 today. Before we get started, CNL respectfully acknowledges that the nuclear power demonstration site is located on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We recognize and appreciate their historical connection to this land, and as the customary keepers and defenders of the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. We also recognize and appreciate the contributions that all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people have made and continue to make in shaping this land we now know as Canada. We acknowledge, respect, and seek to better understand the unique Indigenous history, rights, and title on the lands where we work. Before we kick off today's presentation, a few logistical things to note. First, there is simultaneous interpretation of this discussion. You can access the session in French through the globe icon on the bottom right on the bar on Zoom. Today's session is planned for about 45 minutes. We anticipate the presentation will take around 25 minutes, and then the rest of the time will be for questions. Please use the Q&A function to submit your questions at any point during the presentation, and we'll respond to the questions at the end. The Q&A icon is generally found in the banner along the bottom of the screen. Note today, we will be recording these sessions because we like to post on YouTube after, so people that missed the webinar can watch it. If you experience any technical difficulties, please get in touch with us at ermstakeholder@cnl.ca. Our team will be watching the inbox, so we'll try and get you sorted out. We're also looking to evaluate our webinar more in depth. So following the webinar today, we'll receive an email with a link to complete a short 10-question survey. We'd really appreciate if you would take the time to share your thoughts on our webinars. During today's webinar, you will be hearing from Katie Shorter and Courtney Power. And after this discussion is complete, we'll open the floor for a Q&A discussion period. So we'll get started here. I'm going to pass things over to Katie. Katie, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Katie Shorter. I'm the project director for the Nuclear Power Demonstration, or NPD, closure project. I think we have some of the team, the environmental assessment team, on the call today. So I'll get Courtney and Graham and Sophia all to turn their cameras on and give you a little wave. Courtney's going to do most of the talking today. She's our decommissioning and environmental specialist. But we also have Graham Porter on, who's our safety analyst, and Sophia Kokonakis on as our environmental analyst, in case there's any questions at the end that Courtney and I need some help with to answer for you. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to remind everybody what we are working on here at NPD. So right now we are undertaking an environmental assessment, and we've requested a license amendment change from the CNSC, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, to decommission the NPD reactor through in situ disposal. So what that means is that we want to leave the remaining inventory, empty metal systems and components, in place. And to do that, we're going to add several different barriers, including grout, a concrete cap, and an engineered cover. But for now, I'll just sort of focus on the environmental assessment process and where we're at. So this project was launched back in 2016, when we posted the project description. And in 2017, we posted our initial draft of our environmental impact statement. Then in 2018, or sorry, near the end of 2017 and into 2018, there was an open public comment period. And during that time, we received hundreds of comments from the public, Indigenous nations, communities and organizations, the CNSC, and the other federal regulators about our draft environmental impact statement. So since then, it's been a number of years. We've taken time to address that feedback, and among many other changes, we've expanded our list of valued components. We've integrated results of Indigenous studies. And we've updated our long-term safety assessment to include additional receptor groups and other uses and pathways to make sure we're fully evaluating what will happen to the site in the long term. Now, Courtney has lots of details about more changes to the EIS that we've made. But I did want to note that we've recently completed an important step in the EA process. So in October, we submitted a revised draft of the environmental impact statement. And just last week, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission confirmed that that package of information was complete and that they would be proceeding with the technical review by the federal, provincial, and Indigenous review team. So that's the fourth circle that's indicated, fourth from the left. That review we expect to end near the end of February or into March of 2025. And then the other notes on here sort of lay out the rest of the environmental assessment timeline. So CNL's work to address any comments that come from that next technical review, ultimately submitting a final EIS, and then moving to the hearing process, which includes an opportunity for public and Indigenous intervention and public hearing. So we'll talk a little bit more about next steps near the end of the presentation, but for now we're going to move into the main meat of the presentation. So next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Courtney in just a second, but I just wanted to remind everyone that we've been doing these webinars since 2018. So 6 years of webinars, roughly bi-monthly, sometimes quarterly, but lots of the topics, lots of the information that's contained in our environmental impact statement and about the NPD closure project. We have individual webinars on those topics. So those are on the CNL YouTube page, and then the dates and the topics are listed here. But today, we really want to focus on highlighting to you some of the changes that we've made to our environmental impact statement since it was first released in 2018, or sorry, 2017. So I'm going to pass it off to Courtney, who's going to run through this.
Thank you, Katie. So here's a quick summary. Next slide, please. Here's a quick summary of the key changes from the 2017 to 2024 EIS that have been made within EIS and other supporting documents in response to comments from Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations, as well as the public and regulatory agencies. So I'll provide a bit more detail on some of these changes during our webinar today. First off, since we submitted our original draft EIS in 2017, we've improved our description of the project. So we've changed terminology such as in situ decommissioning to in situ disposal throughout the EIS. We've also provided a fuller explanation of the natural and engineered controls that contribute to safety, describing the concrete monolith, the proposed concrete cap and engineered cover within the facility, or covering the facility rather, the facility location, so it's underground and bedrock in a remote location, as well as land use controls such as signage and land deeds. One key area of interest from regulatory agencies are our natural analogs, which are examples of how similar materials have performed over time to help us understand and predict how the NPD facility will perform. So components of the facility that can be compared to natural analogs are the grout, metal components, lead, the concrete cap, and the soil cover. So today I'm just going to highlight how these natural analogs for a few of these match up with what we model and predict for NPD. So the first component to look at is grout. The grout incorporates blast furnace slag, similar to volcanic ash used in Roman cements. So Roman cements have been shown to last over 2,000 years with very little degradation. This validates the assumptions in the post-closure safety assessment and indicates that the grout will survive and perform its function as a barrier. Next are the metal reactor components. So these are iron-based materials. Corrosion of iron-based materials have been studied in artifacts, native metals, and meteorites. These materials have been shown to take thousands of years to corrode, which aligns with corrosion rates we've used in our post-closure safety assessment. And finally, the soil cover. Here we can examine how ancient tombs with wooden coffins have stayed dry for up to 15,000 years when covered by a fine material such as clay. We can also look at existing earthen mounds, such as those used in Ireland and England, that date to the 6th and 7th centuries. Also, mounds in British Columbia that date to approximately 1,500 years old. So again, these natural analogs demonstrate that what we are proposing for the NPD waste facility will remain intact and protected over the long-term scales, which are considered in our post-closure safety assessment. So the revised NPD EIS also provides more detail on the project scope. So we've provided a specific grout formula that will be used and more detail on how the grouting of the below grade structure will be accomplished. We've identified a preferred on-site location for the batch mixing plant to enable the proposed in situ disposal for the facility. We've clarified that ventilation stack will remain in place to protect the chimney swifts, which are a species at risk, and explained how the stack will be isolated from the facility. We've updated the description of final site restoration in the decommissioning execution phase. We've developed a surveillance plan for the institutional control phase. And we've provided an updated project schedule, as Katie has mentioned earlier. So now turning to waste strategy, we've also improved our understanding of the waste, which is an area of interest for public and regulatory agencies. We've updated the radioactive inventory and clarified references used for the facility reference inventory. The reference inventory serves as a limit of radiological or non-radiological contaminants which may be grouted within the NPD facility. Now for PCBs, all PCB containing light ballasts will be removed prior to the start or prior to or as part of decommissioning activities. The concentrations of PCBs in solids at NPD is below the regulatory limit of 50 milligrams per kilogram. If any PCBs are above regulatory limits during the decommissioning of the facility, this waste would be deemed non-compliant and would be removed and dispositioned through CNEL's hazardous waste process before the facility is grouted. There is lead paint throughout the waste facility, and there is also a significant quantity of lead associated with shielding, mainly in the fueling machine room. The total quantity of lead present is estimated to be about 225 metric tons, so nearly 174 tons, of which is located in the fueling machine room. Our previous estimate was approximately 435 metric tons. So next I'll talk about the changes to value components, which is an area of interest for Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations, as well as the public and regulatory agencies. So throughout the EIS, we've expanded explanations of where and how value components were included and assessed. So based on what we've heard through Indigenous engagement, additional value components were added, such as moose, fox, otter, mink, short-tailed weasel, berries, and mushrooms. For the geological and hydrogeological environment, soil quality, and groundwater flow were also added as value components. We've added a specific environmental component for Indigenous socioeconomic health, for socioeconomic and health, and I'll describe this a bit later. And lastly, we've added Appendix B to reflect species at risk, status, or species. So next, I'd like to highlight some of our improvements that we've made to protect species at risk at the NPD site. So first, since 2017, we've expanded biodiversity survey work for bats, waterfowl, and other species at the site. As I already mentioned, we are keeping the ventilation stack as a valued habitat for the chimney swift, and our plans now include timing restrictions for any modifications to the stack to avoid, where possible, disturbing the swifts. We've also added some mitigations, so for example, signage, training, and surveys for effects on milk snakes related to road mortality at the site. We have plans for regular surveys and replanting of milkweed to support the protection of the monarch butterfly as well. And the federal and provincial statuses for species at risk have all been updated to current. We've also made some significant progress and key improvements in Section 6 of the EIS, which details our engagement with Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations. CNL has undertaken meaningful and targeted engagement to address areas of concern and interest on the project. So within the EIS, we've updated our Indigenous engagement to present. We've updated the value components table to map to Indigenous valued components. We've improved the description of key interests and concerns. And we've updated Appendix C, which contains updated summary tables of interest and concerns and a record of engagement activities. Now, as part of this engagement, CNL has shared interest and concerns tables with the Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations, specifically requesting verification that CNL has accurately captured their interests and concerns on the project. Improvements have also been made in Section 7 of the EIS, which details CNL's engagement with the public. So within the document, we've updated public engagement to the present. These engagement activities include public information sessions, webinars like we have today, in-person and virtual open houses, as well as a virtual visitor center. In addition, planned future engagements have been updated to 2024-2025 with new subsections added as well. Another key interest has been our baseline characterization data for the NPD site. The revised draft EIS contains more information on monitoring data for air quality, airborne releases from the NPD ventilation stack, monitoring locations, and flow information for tile drain 2, average tritium gross beta values for manhole 2, soil quality, and tritium concentrations in surface soil. So the revised document contains more recent characterization data from the completed phase 2 environmental site assessment, as well as the geoscientific characterization. We've also added detail to describe previous anthropogenic disturbances of the Ottawa River shoreline within the local study area, resulting from historic activities, such as the construction of the Swisha Dam. The EIS provides a more fulsome description of the highly modified landscape at the NPD site, where there was significant excavation into the bedrock. Numerous man-made terraces and steep interconnecting benches were created for construction and security purposes. We've also undertaken baseline sampling, which will support our follow-up monitoring programs. So this is important to ensure that we have a pre-project condition at locations and frequencies that are needed for monitoring during the project execution and into the institutional control phase. As part of this work, we have completed a new study of sediment, benthic invertebrates, and fish habitat. We've also completed additional work to sample surface water at key locations important for follow-up monitoring, and we established baseline noise levels and dust conditions at the NPD site as well. Next is our work on geosynthesis. So this allowed us to get a better description of the intact rock and mass quality at the site. The improved geosynthesis report also includes new information about neotectonics and paleoseismology. So neotectonics are motions and deformations of the Earth's crust that are important, whether are current and recent in geological time. And paleoseismology is the study of geologic sediments and rocks for signs of ancient earthquakes. This has allowed us to add a new scenario to assess seismic hazards. And as mentioned previously, several sections of the EIS were updated with information from the geosynthesis technical supporting document to provide a more fulsome baseline description of the site. So another improvement that has been made possible from our additional characterization efforts is the update to our groundwater modeling. Again, this is a key technical supporting document for the NPD EIS. Updates to the groundwater model were based on data from Phase 2 environmental site assessment, the geoscientific characterization work that we've completed, and also our geosynthesis work. The groundwater model was updated and expanded and has been calibrated with water levels measured at the NPD site. The model also includes new figures that show water levels, water table elevations, velocity, as well as head contours. The revised EIS also contains updated hydrogeology data to align with updated groundwater models. So one area of interest that has been very important to Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations, as well as regulatory agencies, has been the incorporation of Indigenous interests into the project. So we've made the following improvements to our EIS. We've updated the descriptions of traditional land and resource use with information drawn from existing studies and reports, Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations' websites, Indigenous information submitted from other CNL designated projects, formal and informal engagement activities, and general knowledge of the region. Results of Indigenous studies have been integrated into the revised draft EIS to provide a more fulsome description of Indigenous land and resource use in the study area. Particularly Section 8.10 has been added to focus on Indigenous socioeconomic and health interests and introduce specific Indigenous receptors. CNL has revised the EIS to include consideration of potential interactions of the project with numerous Indigenous well-being and health components, such as population and demographics, economy and employment, housing and infrastructure, Indigenous resident use and enjoyment of the property, decision-making, and the health of members of the public. The EIS does not predict any adverse residual effects on Indigenous value components. And we've added an Indigenous receptor to our post-closure safety assessment, which I will discuss next. So another area of improvement is alignment with the most recent post-closure safety assessment, and this is the 4th iteration of the post-essay. The EIS provides a summary of the scenarios that you see here. In particular, the revised EIS contains updated summaries of sensitivity calculations and disruptive events, which are further described in the 4th iteration of the post-closure safety assessment. Now, additionally, 2 new receptor groups were considered. So an Indigenous receptor and an off-site resident receptor. CNL included a potential exposure group consisting of a family of self-sufficient Indigenous receptors in the NPD area. The exposure profile in the post-closure period was developed based on the traditional Indigenous lifestyle pre-European contact. This lifestyle resulted in a more cautious dose estimate than that based on a traditional or a current day lifestyle rather, where some food bought in store and not likely from the contaminated area. The predicted peak dose to an indigenous receptor is 0.0004 millisieverts per year, which is 500 times less than the dose criterion. The analysis demonstrates that the impacts on indigenous peoples, the public, and the environment are negligible. CNL has also updated its indigenous receptor to align with characteristics that have been based on the results of an indigenous harvest and diet study. The human health assessment in the post-closure safety assessment also includes an even more conservative scenario where an indigenous receptor's characteristics match a pre-European contact lifestyle. The results of the post-closure safety assessment have been integrated into the revised draft EIS. So our current understanding of the long-term effects of global warming indicate that the next ice age will not occur for 100,000 years as a result of anthropogenic climate change. The long-term assessment timeframe for this project is approximately 10,000 years. Therefore, glaciation is not considered in CNL's assessment. Additional information is also provided in the EIS about the impacts of an earthquake, specifically on the cover, the slope north of NPD, and potential for cracking for the underground structural walls. And finally, another key topic of interest for both Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations, as well as regulatory agencies, is our follow-up monitoring. So since we submitted our original draft EIS in 2017, we've developed draft follow-up monitoring plans that cover monitoring for both the decommissioning execution phase and the institutional control phase of the project, based on the applicable Canadian Standards Association standards. The draft plans cover environmental monitoring, effluent monitoring, and groundwater monitoring. So the map here shows the key environmental monitoring locations for the institutional control period, including surface water monitoring. As you can see, the blue dots near the top of the image here, as well as ambient radioactivity monitoring, the green dots on the image. So we call these plans draft as we seek additional information from Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations, as well as other interested parties. The draft plans won't be finalized until we understand any requirements that may come from the environmental assessment decision for the project. Other updates to the EIS include updating information on replacing our monitoring wells, as well as updating our sampling locations. So with that, I will turn it back over to Katie to give an update on what's next for the NPD closure project.
Thanks very much, Courtney. So I'll just maybe pause here just for a second. Courtney ran through a lot of changes that we've made since 2018. And one of the things you might have noticed is a reference to the sections of the EIS that are relevant on some of those slides. So once we've posted our recording, you'll be able to go back and check that. And as part of the process, now that we have submitted this revised EIS and moved on to the federal provincial Indigenous review, the CNSC has posted the new EIS to the IAA registry. So that's available to anyone to pull up and look at those specific changes that Courtney's run through at a high level. Now thinking about specifically what's going to happen next, as I mentioned at the outset of the presentation today, we're now entering a period where the Federal Provincial Indigenous Review Team will look at the submission made by CNL, so the environmental impact statement, and a number of supporting documents that Courtney mentioned today. What we expect at the end of that review is that CNL will have additional information requests to respond to. And so there will be a period of time for us to work on those and answer any of those outstanding questions before we're ready to submit a final EIS. And right now we're forecasting that we would be able to do that final EIS submission in spring or summer of 2026. Also on that first slide, I pointed to the hearing process. So it will be a two-part hearing. Part one is a technical component. Then there will be a formal public and Indigenous intervention period before there is a part two hearing, which is the public hearing. So if anyone's looking for some additional information on that, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission website has information about the NPD project itself, and it points to the impact assessment registry where there is something we call the administrative protocol, and it lays out those steps that we've talked about today to get us toward a decision about whether we can proceed with the in situ disposal of the nuclear power demonstration site. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we're hoping to do in the next couple months is to host a technical, what we call a breakfast briefing. We haven't had one of those for a little while, a couple of years. But this would be an in-person session where we would talk in depth, in more detail about a technical topic of interest to the public or others. So I see that the poll question is up now. So here's really where you can weigh in and let us know what you think we should talk about at that breakfast briefing. So we'll give everybody a couple minutes here. This is a long answer, open poll question. So no multiple choice here. We are looking for your input. So take a few minutes if you would like to let us know what you'd like to hear about at breakfast briefing. Maybe Mike, you can just sort of pay attention and see how many answers were coming in and see when that slows down so we can close it out. But we'll give people another minute or two.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add, if you can't think of something now, you can always email us your ideas afterwards. If you can't, we are putting them on the spot, but it looks like we're getting a few here. So yeah, we'll give it a few minutes. And while if you are finished with the poll question, if you can think of any questions you would like to ask us, the Q&A session, please type it into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Okay, we see some questions coming in, and we'll give the poll another minute here. While we wait, Katie, we did get quite a technical question that came in, and maybe we'll give this time to mention that we'll respond in writing due to technical, and it's way better to respond in writing.
Yeah, so there's actually a couple of great, very technical questions related to inventory that I can see coming in. So very much appreciate those. So one's related to instantaneous release of surface contamination, so how that moves once we close the facility. And then specifically related to the inventory of some of the systems. Now, these are very technical. I think we will, well, I know what we will do is we'll respond to these in writing and we'll share those with all the webinar participants. But here's a situation where maybe inventory is a great topic for a breakfast briefing. What I will say is anyone who has these technical topics where they really want to speak to our experts, please reach out to ERM Stakeholder Relations, and we can coordinate, a one-on-one type conversation where we can answer these in more detail, and we can have all of our experts available.
No, that's great. That's a great idea, Katie. Thank you. So yeah, when we do post, it takes a couple days to get the recording and get it up on YouTube, but then we send out the links to everyone that signed up for the webinars, and it'll be the answers, the write-ups to the questions. We'll all go together in an email to all the participants. Okay. So time to get to some other questions here. Okay. I am interested in how you get the 100,000 year ice age prediction and compare it to NPD's 10,000 year. What metrics do you use to get that data?
Thanks, Mike. I can a quick answer on that one. Metrics for the ice age have been based on current climate change methodology, which is part of the IPCC methodology, which is predicting the temperature rises over the next 100,000 years. Current understanding of long-term effects of the global warming indicates that the next ice age from this data is not going to occur for 100,000 years, and that's just purely as a result of anthropogenic climate change. This is something we also studied earlier in previous iterations of post essays that we've done as well. So we have just in case we have the glaciation wrong, we've also analysed in a previous scenario what happens if we bring this forward and the glaciation occurs early, and we still find that an early ice age and glaciation is not really an issue for the NPD facility. So just in summary, it comes from the IPCC data. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, thank you, Graham. Okay, get to the next question here. For Katie, do you have anyone from the AOO reviewing the new draft?
So this is a great question. So the revised draft of the environmental impact statement is available to anyone to have a look at. We will be sending out some individual communications to the Indigenous nations, communities, and organizations that we've been working on since the outset of this project, but also to our stakeholder, our interested stakeholder list, to let you know where you can access the environmental impact statement to take a look at changes.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Next question is for Courtney. When will the site be released from regulatory control?
Thanks, Mike. So regulatory control, since institutional control would continue for a minimum period of 100 years and may continue beyond that until it can be demonstrated to the CNSC that regulatory controls are no longer required. So after the institutional control period, the licensed area would be released from regulatory controls and would be available for other uses. So we'd have fencing and warning signs, and security arrangements made to protect the site. So the quick answer is minimum of 100 years, but the controls in place would be for as long as necessary.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. Okay, just checking if there are any others. Yay, just while we wait to see if there's any more questions, probably a good time to encourage everyone to please take time to complete the follow-up survey that we'll be sending out shortly after today's webinar. We'll send out the links to the recording. Like I said, once we get all the questions answered, the write-up questions answered, we'll send out the links to the recording. Also, if you do have any breakfast briefing ideas that you, if you didn't get the poll question in time, please send it to ermstakeholder@cnl.ca, any of your ideas. We'd love to see them. And just wait a little bit longer to see if there's any more questions coming in. Okay, we'll do one final one. So this is a follow-up to the regulatory control question. What does as long as necessary mean?
So as long as necessary, until it can be demonstrated to the CNSC that regulatory controls are no longer required. So we do say for a minimum period of 100 years, but it could be beyond that. So it's up to the CNSC to really determine that.
Okay, thank you, Courtney. Okay, one more. Now we'll do our final one. Okay, so for Katie, who will be financially responsible for the institutional control, federal, provincial, or others?
So that's a really great question. Thank you for that question. So the decommissioning, the cleanup of the NPD reactor and CNL's other nuclear legacies, so our past nuclear work, there is a commitment from the Government of Canada to complete that cleanup. So it's a federal responsibility. The funding will come from the federal government to continue institutional controls at the site for as long as necessary.
Okay, thank you, Katie. And my mistake, we do have one more. Okay, now this is the final one. What will change between this submission and the final submission?
I can take that one too, Mike. Thanks. This is another great question. So that is a little bit of a question mark, actually. So we don't expect there to be any significant changes to the conclusions of the EIS. We're predicting that there are no residual effects to the environment around the NPD site, people in the environment. But what we're waiting for right now is the feedback from that federal, provincial, Indigenous review team. And as I mentioned, that will come in the spring. So at that point, we'll be able to provide a better idea of exactly what changes might come before the final environmental impact statement is submitted. But the short answer really is that we need to address any feedback that comes from that review, close out any concerns from federal, provincial, Indigenous reviewers before we're able to submit that final EIS.
Okay, great. Thank you, Katie. Okay, we'll end it there. And all the questions that came in, any of the technical ones that we didn't get to, we will respond to you in writing. And thank you to Katie, Courtney, Graham, Sophia, and all the comms people in the background, Margot, Rachel, Jason, Carolina. Thank you for a great webinar. This is one of 3. Our next one is on facilities decommissioning, and then we have one on reactor segmentation afterwards, before lunch. So once again, thank you all for attending this webinar. We do these bi-monthly. And again, you can always reach out to us at ermstakeholder@cnl.ca with any feedback or any ideas for upcoming breakfast briefings. Okay, thank you all. Take care. Bye.